After 20 years of marriage, my wife told me she had a gift for me and to meet her at a hotel. When I arrived, I found her waiting with divorce papers, a plane ticket, and her high school sweetheart. She said, "I transferred your retirement money to my account. Now I don't need you. I'm leaving forever with my lover." But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now let's dive into today's story. John Holloway noticed the changes before the truth revealed itself. It started small. Lydia stopped asking about his day. Not gradually, but suddenly, as if someone had flipped a switch in her brain and decided his work stories no longer mattered. He'd come home from the warehouse, shoulders tight from lifting and organizing shipments, and she'd barely glance up from her phone. The device had become an extension of her hand, always glowing, always demanding her attention. He tried once, stood in the kitchen doorway while she scrolled, the blue light washing over her face in the dimming evening. "We had 3 trucks delayed today. Ice on I-70 backed everything up for hours." Her thumb kept moving. Doug nearly had a breakdown trying to reschedule the deliveries. "That's rough." She didn't look up. John set his keys on the counter, the metallic clink louder than it should have been in the quiet house. He watched her for another moment, waiting for something, eye contact, a follow-up question, anything. But Lydia remained absorbed, her lips curving into a small smile at whatever appeared on that glowing screen. The smile wasn't for him. He turned away and opened a refrigerator, staring at the shelves without really seeing them. The hum of the appliance filled the silence between them, a low mechanical drone that somehow felt more alive than their marriage. This became the pattern. Lydia guarded that phone like it contained nuclear launch codes. She'd angle the screen away when he walked past, set it face down on the table during dinner, take it with her to the bathroom. Once he'd seen her jump when it buzzed, a full-body flinch like she'd been caught doing something wrong, which he supposed she had. The bedroom grew colder. Not the temperature. Spring in Missouri was mild, comfortable, but the space between them and their queen-sized bed stretched wider each night. John would reach for her the way he had for 15 years of marriage, his hand finding her hip in the darkness, and Lydia would go rigid. Every muscle in her body would tense. "I'm exhausted," she'd say, her voice flat and practiced. Then she'd roll toward the far edge of the mattress, putting inches and then feet between them, until she might as well have been sleeping in another room entirely. John would lie there, staring at the ceiling fan's slow rotation, listening to her breathing even out into sleep. She had no trouble sleeping these days. No guilt keeping her awake. No second thoughts disturbing her rest. He had plenty of both. They lived in a subdivision on the western edge of Clearwater Bend, Missouri, where the streets had names like Meadowbrook Lane and Sunset Ridge Drive. The houses all looked similar. Vinyl siding in neutral tones, 2-car garages, front lawns that the homeowners association required be kept trim and green. It was the kind of neighborhood where people waved when you drove past, but watched everything through their windows. Where everyone knew everyone else's business, or at least pretended they did. John worked logistics for Midwest Supply Solutions, a regional company that coordinated shipments between manufacturers and retailers. It wasn't glamorous. Most days involved spreadsheets, phone calls with trucking companies, and the occasional crisis when weather or mechanical failures disrupted carefully planned routes. But he was good at it. Steady, patient, meticulous. He solved problems. He kept things moving. Lydia worked at Clearwater Medical Billing, processing insurance claims in a small office downtown. She'd always liked the job because of the people, her coworkers, the doctors and nurses who'd stop by, the patients who sometimes called with questions. She liked being seen, being acknowledged. "I need to feel appreciated," she told him once, years ago, when they were still happy. Or when John had thought they were happy. "I need to know I matter." He tried. God, he tried. Compliments when she dressed up for work. Thank yous when she cooked dinner. Random flowers from the grocery store, left on the kitchen counter as a surprise. But apparently, it hadn't been enough. Or maybe he'd been enough, and she'd simply found something, someone else who made her feel more alive. The affair lived in the details. A new perfume, subtly different from what she'd worn for years. Gym memberships that actually got used now, resulting in a body more toned than before. Lingerie that John never saw her wear. Late nights at the office that became routine rather than exceptional. Weekend errands that took twice as long as they should. "I'm just running to Target," she'd say, grabbing her purse and keys. 3 hours later, she'd return with a single bag containing items they didn't need. John watched it all unfold with a strange sort of detachment, like he was observing someone else's life through a telescope. Part of him wanted to confront her immediately, to demand answers and force the truth into the open. But another part, the meticulous, patient part that made him good at his job, told him to wait, to gather information, to understand the full scope of what he was dealing with before making any moves. So he waited, and he listened. Lydia grew careless. Or maybe she stopped caring whether he noticed. She'd leave her phone charging in the bedroom while she showered, no longer afraid he'd pick it up. She'd mention a coworker named Darren with increasing frequency, casual little references that were supposed to sound innocent but rang false in John's ears. Darren says the new billing system is a nightmare. Darren had the funniest story about a patient today. "I'm grabbing coffee with some people from work after my shift. Darren's going too." Darren. Always Darren. John looked him up on social media. Found him easily enough. Darren Klein, age 36, married with 2 kids. His profile was full of performative masculinity. Gym selfies, posts about craft beer and football, shared memes about grilling and being a real man. His wife appeared occasionally in older photos, a tired-looking woman with a forced smile. The recent pictures featured only Darren himself, posing with weights or standing beside his truck. John scrolled through the comments on Darren's posts. Found Lydia's name there multiple times, always with laughing emojis or heart reactions. Public breadcrumbs of something private. One evening in late March, Lydia left her laptop open on the kitchen table. She'd been paying bills, or pretending to, and had gone upstairs to change out of her work clothes. John had been washing dishes, hot water running over his hands, when he'd heard the soft chime of a new message notification. He turned off the faucet, dried his hands slowly on a dish towel, the rough cotton absorbing the water while his heart rate accelerated. Walked to the table where the laptop sat, its screen still bright, cursor blinking in a spreadsheet. The message popped up in the corner. A preview from Gmail, the sender's name visible, Darren Klein. "Can't wait to have you to myself again. Last night was worth the risk." John's hands went cold despite the hot dishwater moments before. He sat down in the chair, the wood creaking under his weight. Pulled the laptop closer. Opened the full email account. 8 months. That's how long the trail went back. 8 months of messages, careful at first, then increasingly bold. Planning meetings. Sharing fantasies. Making promises about a future together. Complaining about their respective spouses. John too boring, too predictable. Darren's wife too demanding, too suspicious. Lydia had saved it all. Every word, every plan, every betrayal documented in a Gmail account she'd apparently forgotten to keep locked. John read everything, took his time, absorbed every detail with the same meticulous attention he brought to freight manifests and delivery schedules. The late afternoon light faded to evening while he sat there, the house quiet except for the occasional sound of Lydia moving around upstairs. There were hotel receipts attached to some emails. Photos exchanged. Nothing explicit, but intimate enough to make John's stomach turn. References to elaborate lies told to cover their tracks. Jokes about how clueless their spouses were. John suspects nothing, Lydia had written. He's too wrapped up in work to notice anything. That line burned itself into John's mind. The casual dismissal. The contempt barely hidden beneath the words. When he finally closed the laptop, his hands were steady, his breathing normal. The shock had transformed into something colder, harder, something that felt almost like clarity. He stood up, pushed the chair back into place, and returned to the kitchen sink. Finished washing the dishes, dried them, put them away in their proper cabinets, wiped down the counter, took out the trash. When Lydia came downstairs 20 minutes later, wearing yoga pants and one of his old college sweatshirts, John was sitting on the couch watching the news. "Want to order pizza?" she asked, leaning against the doorway. "Sure," he said. "Whatever you want." She smiled, pulled out her phone to place the order, and settled onto the opposite end of the couch. They ate dinner in comfortable silence, the way they had hundreds of times before. Lydia scrolled through social media between bites. John watched weather patterns scroll across the TV screen. When they went to bed that night, Lydia fell asleep within minutes, her breathing deep and even, untroubled by guilt or consequences. John lay awake until nearly 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling fan's rotation, planning his next moves with the same careful precision he brought to every complex logistics problem he'd ever solved. The difference was that this time, the cargo he was managing wasn't freight. It was his entire life. 2 weeks passed. John went to work, came home, made small talk with his wife. He smiled when appropriate, nodded at her stories about the office, kept his face neutral when she mentioned Darren's name. He also started documenting everything. Screenshots of the emails, time-stamped, and saved to a cloud storage account Lydia didn't know existed. Photos of credit card statements showing hotel charges on dates when Lydia claimed to be working late or shopping with friends. Recordings of phone conversations where her voice changed, became softer and more intimate when certain calls came through. Missouri was a one-party consent state for recording. John had checked. He consulted with a divorce attorney in Columbia, driving an hour each way to ensure no one in Clearwater Bend would see his car at a local law office. The attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Gonzalez, reviewed his documentation with professional detachment. "This is comprehensive," she said, tapping her pen against the folder. "More than enough for a fault-based divorce if you want to pursue that route. Missouri recognizes adultery as grounds." "I want to pursue every route," John said quietly. Patricia studied him for a long moment. "You're calmer than most people I see in your situation." "I'm done being surprised. Now I'm just being thorough." "Good." She opened a legal pad, began writing notes. "Let's talk about assets, timelines, and strategy." They spoke for 2 hours. When John left her office, he had a plan. Not just for divorce, but for making sure Lydia understood exactly what she destroyed. He drove home in the gathering dusk, the highway cutting through farmland and small towns, and felt something like peace settle over him. Not happiness, that was gone, maybe forever, but peace. The peace of knowing exactly what needed to be done and having the tools to do it. Lydia was home when he arrived, cooking pasta in the kitchen, humming along to music playing from her phone. The domesticity of the scene would have been comforting once. Now it was just another performance. "Hey," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "Where were you?" "Had to look at a warehouse issue in Columbia. Took longer than expected." "Well, dinner's almost ready. Want wine?" "Sure." They ate together. Talked about nothing. She mentioned that Darren's wife had been acting crazy and jealous lately, rolling her eyes as if the woman's suspicions were unfounded and irrational. John made sympathetic noises and refilled her wine glass. Later that night, Lydia received a text message that made her smile in that particular way, the way she never smiled at John anymore. She excused herself to the bathroom, phone in hand. John waited until he heard the water running, then opened his own phone and navigated to the cloud storage account. Added the screenshot he'd taken of her credit card statement that afternoon. The charges told their own story. Hotel rooms on Thursday afternoons, restaurants in Columbia where she'd supposedly been shopping alone, gas station purchases on routes that made no sense for her claimed destinations. Everything documented, everything preserved. He was building a case, piece by piece, the way he'd organize a complex shipment. Each element had to be tracked, verified, properly stored. No detail too small. No evidence too insignificant. When Lydia came back, she settled beside him on the couch and actually leaned against his shoulder. The affection startled him, the first physical contact she'd initiated in weeks. He almost pulled away, but caught himself, wrapped an arm around her instead. "This is nice," she murmured. John said nothing, just held her while she scrolled through her phone, probably reading messages from Darren, and wondered if she felt any guilt at all. If somewhere beneath the lies and the planning and the casual betrayal, there was any part of his wife left. He decided it didn't matter. That woman, the one he'd married 15 years ago, who'd promised to love him through everything, was gone. The person in his arms now was a stranger wearing a familiar face. 3 days later, Lydia made her move. She'd been planning it for weeks, John realized later. All the pieces had been in motion. She consulted her own attorney, Messier, less careful than John's, but still competent enough. She'd opened a separate bank account. She'd printed financial documents from John's retirement account, highlighting the balance with a yellow marker like she was planning a heist. She'd also booked a room at the Hampton Inn near the interstate exit, a neutral location between Clearwater Bend and Columbia. Neutral ground for what she apparently thought would be a clean break. John found out about the reservation the same way he'd found out about everything else, by paying attention while Lydia assumed he wasn't. She'd written the date and time on a post-it note stuck to her desk calendar. Thursday, 4 p.m. Time to start over. So when Thursday arrived, John left work early. Told his supervisor he had a family emergency, which was technically true. Drove to the Hampton Inn and waited in his truck in the parking lot, watching the entrance. Darren's vehicle arrived first, a lifted black pickup with aftermarket wheels, the kind of truck that screamed insecurity to anyone paying attention. He climbed out wearing designer jeans and a polo shirt, checking his phone as he walked into the lobby. Lydia's sedan pulled in 15 minutes later. She took longer getting out, checking her reflection in the rearview mirror, reapplying lipstick. When she finally walked toward the entrance, her stride was confident, purposeful. This was it, her big moment. John gave them 20 minutes. Let them settle in, get comfortable, start whatever conversation they thought they were going to have. Then he got out of his truck, pocketed his phone with its voice recorder already running, and walked into the hotel. The room number had been easy to find. Lydia used the same password for everything, including her email confirmation. 3rd floor, room 317. John took the elevator up, his heartbeat steady, his mind clear. He knocked once. Firm, authoritative. Darren opened the door, his confident expression faltering when he saw who stood in the hallway. "What the? We need to talk." John stepped forward, and Darren backed up instinctively, unable to hold his ground when confronted directly. Lydia sat on the edge of the bed, papers spread out beside her. Her face went pale, then flushed red. "John, you shouldn't be here." "I think I should." He closed the door behind him, stood with his back to it, looked at both of them, his wife and her affair partner, caught in their carefully planned moment like animals in a trap. The room smelled like cheap air freshener and cleaning chemicals. Generic art hung on the walls. The curtains were drawn, creating an artificial twilight even though it was late afternoon outside. "How did you?" Lydia started. "No," John finished. "I've known for weeks, Lydia. I know everything." Darren moved to stand behind Lydia, one hand on her shoulder in a gesture that was probably meant to look protective but came across as possessive. "Look, man, this isn't." "Don't." John's voice was quiet but carried enough edge to stop Darren mid-sentence. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here because my wife apparently decided to have this conversation in a hotel room instead of our home." Lydia stood up, and he saw she'd been preparing for this. The papers beside her were divorce filings. A bank statement showing John's retirement balance highlighted in yellow. A list of assets she apparently planned to claim. She'd done her homework, just not well enough. "I moved the money," she said, her voice stronger now, emboldened by having Darren present. "I'm done pretending this marriage works. Darren and I love each other. I deserve more than what we have." "You moved the money," John repeated, letting the words hang there. "Into an account you can't touch. My attorney says." "Your attorney is wrong." John pulled his phone from his pocket, opened the banking app, turned the screen toward her. "You attempted to move the money. There's a difference." Lydia stepped forward, grabbed the phone from his hand, stared at the screen. Her face went from confident to confused to afraid in the space of 3 seconds. That's not possible. I have the confirmation. You initiated a transfer that requires administrative approval and a 72-hour clearance period. I froze the account 30 minutes after you made the request." John took his phone back, pocketed it. You really should have read the fine print on our retirement account terms. Darren's hand dropped from Lydia's shoulder. What does that mean? It means, John said, keeping his eyes on Lydia, that your plan just fell apart. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Lydia sank back onto the bed, staring at her papers like they'd suddenly become illegible. This doesn't change anything, she finally said, but her voice wavered. I still want a divorce. I still choose him. Okay. John nodded once. Then we'll do this properly. Through attorneys. Through the courts. By the book. That single word, okay, seemed to frighten her more than anger would have. Lydia looked up at him, searching his face for rage or hurt or desperation. Found nothing but calm resolve. That's it, she asked. You're just fine with this? I'm not fine with it, Lydia, but I'm done fighting for someone who stopped fighting for us 8 months ago. He glanced at Darren, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Good luck with all this. John turned toward the door. Wait. Lydia stood up again. We need to talk about. No, we don't. You wanted to start over. Congratulations. Now you get to do it properly. He opened the door, paused in the threshold without looking back. My attorney will be in touch tomorrow. Make sure yours is ready. He walked out, let the door close behind him, and made it all the way to his truck before his hands started shaking. Not from fear or sadness, but from the sheer release of tension. He'd held it together, stayed calm, kept control. John sat in the driver's seat for 5 minutes, breathing slowly, letting the adrenaline subside. Through the hotel's windows, he could see the 3rd floor. Imagine Lydia and Darren up there, probably arguing now, the fantasy colliding with reality in the worst possible way. When his hands were steady again, he started the truck and drove home. He had work to do, phone calls to make, documents to prepare. The real unraveling was about to begin. John didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat at his home office desk, the spare bedroom that had somehow become his designated space over the years, and organized everything with the precision of someone building a fortress. The emails, the hotel receipts, the text messages he'd recovered from phone backups, the bank statements, the credit card charges, everything time-stamped, everything verified, everything cross-referenced. Patricia had told him that Missouri courts could consider fault in divorce proceedings, particularly regarding asset division. Adultery mattered. Intent to defraud mattered. And John had documentation proving both. But beyond the legal requirements, he had something else. Ammunition. Leverage. The complete, undeniable truth of what Lydia and Darren had done. Not just to him, but in ways that violated employment policies, ethical standards, and other people's trust. Around 3 a.m, John compiled it all into a series of folders. Organized by date, by type, by relevance. Created a master timeline that showed the affair's progression from cautious beginnings to the brazen arrogance of this afternoon's hotel meeting. When dawn broke over Clearwater Bend, casting pale orange light through the office window, John had everything ready. He showered, dressed in one of his better suits, the charcoal one he usually reserved for company meetings, and drove to Patricia's office in Columbia. She'd agreed to meet him early, before normal business hours, sensing the urgency in his voice when he'd called the previous evening. "You look focused," she said when he arrived, gesturing him into her office. "I am." John set a thick manila folder on her desk. "Everything you need is in there. I'd like to file today, if possible." Patricia opened the folder, began reviewing the contents. Her eyebrows rose slightly as she turned pages. "This is comprehensive. Your wife used work email servers for this. Extensively, including during business hours. And her employer is Clearwater Medical Billing?" "Yes." Patricia made a note on her legal pad. "They'll have policies about personal use of company systems. This could complicate things for her professionally." "I'm aware." John's voice was flat, emotionless. She looked up at him. "You understand that filing this much evidence, especially the employment-related material, will likely cause consequences beyond the divorce itself." "That's the point." Patricia studied him for another moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, let me draft the petition. We can file electronically this afternoon." They spent the next 2 hours going through details. Patricia asked questions, clarified points, made strategic notes about asset division and grounds for fault. John answered everything with the same mechanical precision he'd bring to explaining a supply chain breakdown. "One more thing," Patricia said as they finished. "You mentioned the other man is also married?" "Darren Klein. His wife's name is Rebecca. 2 kids, ages 6 and 8. Do you plan to inform her?" John had thought about this question extensively. Consider the ethics, the collateral damage, the way involving Rebecca Klein would detonate Darren's life just as thoroughly as Darren had helped detonate his own. "Yes," he said finally. "She deserves to know." Patricia nodded. "That's your decision to make. Just be careful about how you approach it. Stick to facts, avoid emotion, and document everything." "I will." By early afternoon, the divorce petition was filed with the Boone County Circuit Court. Patricia assured him Lydia would be served with papers within 48 hours. The legal machinery was in motion now, grinding forward with impersonal efficiency. John drove home, feeling strange disconnection between the magnitude of what he'd just done and the ordinariness of the day around him. Traffic moved normally. People went about their business. The world hadn't ended just because his marriage had. Back at his house, it felt wrong to call it their house anymore. John sat down at his computer and began composing letters. 3 of them, each carefully worded, each containing just enough information to be devastating. The first was addressed to Rebecca Klein. He kept it factual, included date ranges, locations where meetings had occurred, and selected email excerpts that proved the affair without being unnecessarily graphic. He provided his phone number and email if she wanted to verify anything or ask questions. "I'm sorry to have to share this information," he wrote at the end, "but I believe you have a right to know the truth about your marriage, just as I wish I'd known sooner about mine." The second letter went to Darren's employer, a car dealership in Columbia where he worked as a finance manager. John had discovered this through Lydia's emails, which contained complaints about Darren's demanding boss and difficult schedule. This letter was different, more formal. It outlined concerns about an employee who had demonstrated poor judgment and questionable ethics in his personal life, attached evidence of using work hours for personal affairs. The email timestamps proved it, and suggested that someone handling financial transactions for customers might not be trustworthy, given his demonstrated willingness to deceive his own wife. John didn't explicitly ask them to fire Darren. He simply provided information and let them draw their own conclusions. The third letter went to Lydia's Human Resources Department at Clearwater Medical Billing. It was similar to the dealership letter, factual, unemotional, backed with evidence. It noted the extensive use of company email systems for personal matters during work hours, attached relevant screenshots, and cited the company's acceptable use policy, which he'd found on their website. Again, he made no specific demands, just provided facts and let the organization handle it according to their own policies. John printed all 3 letters, signed them, and drove to the post office. Sent them via certified mail with return receipts requested. Tracked every step. When he returned home, Lydia's car was in the driveway. She'd gotten off work early, apparently. John found her in the kitchen, making coffee, still wearing her work scrubs. She looked up when he entered. "We need to talk." "Do we?" "John, please. This doesn't have to be awful. We could be adults about this." He almost laughed at the audacity. She'd fucked another man for 8 months, tried to steal his retirement money, and ambushed him in a hotel room with divorce papers, and now she wanted to be adults. "You're right," he said instead. "We could be adults. That's why I filed for divorce this morning." Lydia's coffee mug froze halfway to her lips. "You what?" "Filed. Officially. With the court. You'll be serving the next day or 2. She set the mug down, her hand shaking slightly. "You didn't have to do that. We could have worked this out between ourselves. Like you worked out stealing from our retirement account. I wasn't stealing. It's marital property. I have a right." "You have rights," John interrupted. "But attempting to unilaterally move funds from a joint account without my knowledge isn't exercising your rights. It's theft, and now it's documented as attempted financial fraud." The color drained from Lydia's face. "That's not. John, that's extreme. I didn't commit fraud. Then you have nothing to worry about." He moved past her toward the refrigerator, grabbed a water bottle. My attorney has all the documentation. The court will decide what's fair. What documentation? Her voice rose slightly, panic creeping in. John turned to face her fully. Everything, Lydia. The emails, the hotel receipts, the work computer usage logs, the lies you told to cover your tracks. I have it all. She backed against the counter, gripping its edge. You've been spying on me? I've been paying attention. There's a difference. You're being vindictive. Cruel. No, John said quietly. I'm being thorough. You want it out. I'm giving you out. Just not the way you planned. Lydia's face flushed red. Darren warned me you'd do something like this. He said you'd try to punish me. Did he? John took a long drink of water, let the silence stretch. How is Darren, by the way? He's fine. We're fine. Nothing you do changes what we have. We'll see. Something in John's tone made Lydia go still. What does that mean? It means actions have consequences. For everyone involved. She stared at him, trying to read his expression, but John had perfected neutrality over the past weeks. He gave her nothing. I'm staying with my sister tonight, Lydia finally said. I can't be here with you like this. That's probably for the best. She left 20 minutes later, a hastily packed bag in one hand, her phone pressed her ear with the other. John watched from the living room window as she backed out of the driveway too fast, nearly clipping the mailbox. The house felt different in her absence. Quieter, yes, but also cleaner somehow, like a contaminated space beginning to air out. John's phone rang around 8 that evening. Unknown number. He answered anyway. Is this John Holloway? A woman's voice, tight with controlled emotion. Yes. This is Rebecca Klein. I received your letter. John's heart rate picked up slightly, but his voice remained calm. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. Is it true? All of it. Every word. I can provide additional evidence if you need it. There was a long pause. John heard her breathing, heard what might have been crying being suppressed. Finally, she spoke again, her voice harder now. Thank you for telling me. I suspected something, but I kept talking myself out of it. Kept thinking I was being paranoid. You weren't. No, I wasn't. Another pause. Your wife knows you sent this? Not yet, but she will soon enough. Good. The word came out sharp as glass. They both deserve whatever's coming. Rebecca hung up without saying goodbye. John set his phone down and exhaled slowly. One detonation triggered. 2 more waiting. The certified letter return receipts arrived over the next 3 days. Each one confirmed delivery. Each one a small explosion in someone's carefully constructed reality. Darren's employer received their letter on Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, Darren had been called into a meeting with his boss and the dealership's general manager. By Friday evening, his social media had gone dark. All posts deleted, profiles set to private. Clearwater Medical Billing received their letter on Monday. Lydia was placed on paid administrative leave, pending an investigation into company policy violations. She called John that evening, screaming through the phone about destroyed lives and unfair tactics, her voice raw with rage and desperation. John listened to the entire tirade without interrupting. When she finally ran out of steam, he spoke calmly. You used company resources to conduct an affair. That's not my fault. You bastard. You absolute. Call your attorney, Lydia. I'm done having this conversation. He hung up, blocked her number, forwarded everything to Patricia. Rebecca Klein filed for divorce from Darren that same week. John knew because she called to thank him again, her voice steadier now, fueled by righteous anger instead of devastated shock. He tried to deny it, she said, stood there in our living room and looked me in the eye and called it a misunderstanding. I'm sorry. Don't be. I needed to see him for what he really is. We both did. She paused. He lost his job, you know. The dealership fired him yesterday. John had suspected as much when Darren's social media went dark, but hearing it confirmed still sent a strange jolt through him. Not guilt exactly, more like recognition of the weight of consequences. I didn't ask them to fire him, John said. You didn't have to. You just gave them the truth. What they did with it was their choice. Rebecca's voice softened slightly. I know you're going through your own hell right now, but thank you for caring enough about a stranger to tell her the truth. After she hung up, John sat in his quiet house and thought about that word. Hell. Was that what this was? It didn't feel like hell. Hell implied suffering, chaos, loss of control. This felt more like the methodical dismantling of something that had already died, like raising a condemned building to make room for something new. 3 weeks after filing for divorce, John received a call from Patricia. "We need to talk about the retirement account," she said. "There's been a development." John drove to Columbia that afternoon. Patricia's expression when he entered her office was carefully neutral, which usually meant news was either very good or very bad. "The bank flagged Lydia's transfer attempt," she said, sliding a letter across her desk toward him. "It triggered an internal review." John read the letter. "Read again." "They're investigating her for attempted fraud?" "Potential fraud. The fact that you froze the account immediately raised questions about whether she had proper authorization to initiate the transfer. Combined with the divorce filing and evidence of marital discord, they're taking a closer look at the circumstances." "What does that mean for her?" "It means they've frozen not just your joint retirement account, but also the separate account she opened where she tried to transfer the funds. Everything's locked down pending their investigation." John set the letter down. "So she has no access to anything?" "Not from those accounts, no. Her regular checking and savings aren't affected, but the substantial assets she was counting on are completely out of reach." Patricia leaned back in her chair. "It also means that if the bank determines there was fraudulent intent, she could face criminal charges." The room went very quiet. John could hear the clock on Patricia's wall ticking, marking seconds that suddenly felt heavy. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said finally. "Didn't you?" Patricia's voice was gentle but pointed. "You've been meticulous about everything else. You documented every detail. You protected every asset. You knew the retirement account had those security features." John looked at her, then looked away. "She tried to rob me blind." "I know. And now she's facing the consequences of that choice." Patricia pushed a second document toward him. "Speaking of consequences, I got the response from her attorney today. They're requesting an emergency hearing about access to funds." "Will they get it?" "Probably not. Not with the bank's investigation pending. And even if they did, our evidence of her affair and the attempted unauthorized transfer severely weakens her position." Patricia tapped the document. "Between the professional consequences, the frozen assets, and the strength of our divorce case, your wife is in an extremely difficult position right now." "Good," John said, and meant it. Patricia nodded slowly. "Just remember, this is going to get uglier before it gets better. When people are backed into corners, they don't always act rationally." "She stopped acting rationally 8 months ago." "Fair point." Patricia closed the folder. "I'll keep you updated on the bank's investigation. In the meantime, continue documenting everything. If she contacts you, if she shows up at your house, if she makes any threats or unusual requests, I want to know immediately." John drove home as the sun set over Missouri farmland, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. His phone buzzed multiple times during the drive, block numbers calling repeatedly, probably Lydia trying different methods to reach him. He ignored them all. When he pulled into his driveway, a car he didn't recognize sat parked on the street nearby. As John got out of his truck, Darren emerged from that car. He looked terrible, unshaven, clothes rumpled, eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep or excessive drinking or both. He walked toward John with the careful balance of someone trying to appear sober and failing. "We need to talk," Darren said. John stopped, keys in hand. "No, we don't. You ruined my life. My job, my marriage, everything. Because of your bullshit revenge plot. I sent factual information to relevant parties. What they chose to do with it isn't my responsibility." Darren moved closer, and John could smell the alcohol on him now. "Whiskey, probably. You think you're so smart, so righteous. But you're just a pathetic loser who couldn't keep his wife satisfied. And yet here you are," John said quietly, "drunk and unemployed outside my house at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday. Well, I'm just heading inside to make dinner. Who's pathetic?" Darren's face flushed dark red. His hands clenched into fists. John didn't flinch. "You want to hit me? Go ahead. It'll be assault. Add it to your growing list of problems." For a long moment, they stood there. John calm and still, Darren vibrating with impotent rage. Finally, Darren spat on the ground near John's feet and stumbled back toward his car. "This isn't over," he called as he got in. "Yes," John said. "It is." He watched Darren drive away too fast, tires squealing slightly on the turn. Then John went inside his house, locked the door behind him, and called Patricia to report the incident. She answered on the second ring. "Restraining order? Probably smart. I'll file the paperwork tomorrow. In the meantime, if he shows up again, call the police immediately. Don't engage." "Understood." After hanging up, John stood in his kitchen, the same kitchen where he discovered Lydia's affair weeks ago, and felt something settle deep in his chest. Not satisfaction exactly, not happiness, but a grim sense of progression, like reaching the difficult middle section of a long journey and knowing the hardest climbs were behind him. The affair was exposed. The divorce was filed. The consequences were cascading through both Lydia's and Darren's lives like dominoes falling in slow motion. Now all John had to do was wait and let gravity finish the work. The investigation at Clearwater Medical Billing took 6 weeks. During that time, Lydia lived in a kind of suspended animation, not working, not earning, not able to access the funds she counted on. John heard about her situation through the grapevine. Clearwater Bend was small enough that gossip traveled fast, and Lydia's circumstances made for compelling gossip. People talked at the grocery store, at church, over backyard fences. The narrative was always the same: affair, betrayal, consequences. Jennifer Morrison, a neighbor 2 houses down, stopped John while he was getting his mail one Saturday afternoon. "I heard about you and Lydia," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Such a shame. Marriage is hard work." John gave her a tight smile. "It is when only one person is working at it." Jennifer blinked, recalibrated. "Well, I always thought she seemed restless." "My husband said, I'd rather not discuss it, Jennifer. But thank you for your concern." He walked back to his house before she could press further. These encounters happened regularly now. People wanting to express their support or, more often, their barely concealed curiosity. John learned to deflect politely and keep moving. The restraining order against Darren was approved. Not that it mattered much. Darren had apparently left town after losing his job, moved back in with his parents in Kansas City, according to Rebecca, who'd maintained occasional contact with John through brief, factual text updates. Divorce finalized, she'd texted 2 weeks ago. "Taking him for everything I can. Kids are in therapy." John had responded with a simple acknowledgement and well wishes. Their connection existed purely in the overlap of their mutual betrayals. 2 people who'd been wronged by the same reckless affair. Lydia's administrative leave ended in early May. She was terminated for policy violations, effective immediately. No severance, no references, no second chances. The company had zero tolerance for misuse of their systems, particularly when it involved personal matters that could reflect poorly on their professional reputation. John found out through his attorney, who'd received notification as part of the divorce proceedings. This impacts her ability to pay for legal representation, Patricia noted during their weekly phone call. Her attorney is requesting a modification to the fee structure. "That's not my problem." "I know. I'm just keeping you informed." Patricia paused. There's also been another development. The bank completed their investigation. John sat up straighter in his home office chair. "And they've determined there was insufficient evidence of fraudulent intent to pursue criminal charges. However, they've noted the incident in her financial records and maintained the account freezes pending the divorce settlement. So she still has no access." "Correct. And given the timeline for divorce proceedings in Missouri, that freeze could last another 4 to 6 months. John processed this information. 6 months of Lydia unable to access what she considered her escape funds. 6 months of consequences compounding. How is she surviving financially? That's not our concern, but from what I understand through her attorney's filings, she's moved in with her sister temporarily. She's also filed for unemployment benefits." After the call ended, John sat at his desk for a long time, staring at the wall. Part of him, a small part he wasn't particularly proud of, felt a surge of satisfaction. Lydia had gambled everything on a fantasy with Darren and lost spectacularly. But another part, The part that remembered 15 years of marriage and a woman he'd once loved felt something closer to sorrow. Not for what was happening to her exactly, but for the fact that it had come to this at all. That evening, John's sister Rebecca called. His sister, not Darren's ex-wife. They unfortunately shared the same name, which had led to some confusing moments. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice warm with genuine concern. "I'm fine. John, it's me. You don't have to be fine." He smiled despite himself. Rebecca had always been able to read him better than anyone else. "I'm managing. It's getting easier. Mom wants to know if you're coming to the lake house this summer. She's worried about you being alone. Tell her I'll think about it." They talked for another 20 minutes about family news, Rebecca's kids, their parents' upcoming anniversary. Normal topics that felt almost foreign after weeks of legal proceedings and emotional warfare. When they hung up, John felt marginally lighter. He sold a house in Clearwater Bend in June. The market was good, buyers were plentiful, and being able to advertise it as motivated seller helped close the deal quickly. He made a decent profit, even after paying off the mortgage. Lydia's attorney tried to claim she had rights to half the sale proceeds, but Patricia shut that down quickly. Missouri law was clear about asset division during pending divorces, and the house had been titled in John's name only, something they'd done years ago for tax purposes that now worked in his favor. The day he signed the final papers, John felt a weight lift that he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. That house had become a monument to his failed marriage, every room containing memories that curdled in his stomach. Good riddance. He rented a small apartment near Table Rock Lake while he looked for something more permanent. The apartment was furnished, temporary, anonymous, exactly what he needed. Each morning, he'd wake up to sunlight reflecting off the water in the distance and feel something approaching peace. Lydia, meanwhile, continued her slow descent. John heard about it in pieces, fragments of information that reached him through various channels. She'd applied for jobs at other medical billing companies, but kept getting rejected. The firing from Clearwater Medical had poisoned that well. She tried retail work, service industry jobs, anything that would pay bills. Nobody wanted to hire someone whose story had become local legend. The woman who'd betrayed her husband, lost her job, and destroyed her lover's life in the process. Her sister's patience wore thin after 2 months of housing her. Lydia had to find somewhere else to live. She ended up in a one-bedroom apartment in the old part of Clearwater Bend. The section near the railroad tracks where the buildings were decades old and maintenance was an afterthought. The kind of place where the walls were thin enough to hear every argument, every TV show, every aspect of your neighbors' lives. John knew the building. He'd driven past it 1,000 times without really seeing it. Just another rundown apartment complex that he'd never imagined having any connection to his life. Now his wife lived there. Ex-wife, technically, though the divorce wasn't finalized yet. Friends stopped inviting Lydia to gatherings. The ones who'd once sympathized with her complaints about a boring marriage now saw those complaints in a different light. She'd lied to all of them, after all, used them as alibis for hotel visits, made them unwitting accessories to her betrayal. Social currency had a way of evaporating when trust did. John ran into Emily Parker at the grocery store in late July. Emily had been Lydia's closest friend for years, someone John had always liked well enough. John, she looked uncomfortable, torn between politeness and loyalty to Lydia. "Emily, how are you?" I'm good." She glanced around as if checking whether anyone was watching. "I heard you moved to an apartment near the lake. Fresh start." She nodded, still uncomfortable. "Lydia tried to call me last week. I didn't answer." John said nothing, waiting. "I feel bad about it," Emily continued. "We were friends for so long. But I can't. After everything she did, everything she said." She trailed off, shook her head. "I'm sorry you went through that. Thank you. She wasn't who I thought she was." "No," John agreed quietly. "She wasn't who either of us thought she was." They parted with awkward nods, and John finished his shopping with a strange heaviness in his chest. Watching Lydia's social circle collapse wasn't something he'd specifically planned, but it was an inevitable consequence of her choices. People didn't want to associate with someone who'd proven themselves capable of sustained deception. It was too uncomfortable Too risky. What if they were being lied to next? August arrived with oppressive heat and humidity that made the air feel thick enough to swim through. John had taken a new position with a larger logistics company based in Springfield, commuting 3 days a week and working remotely the other two. The job was challenging in good ways, requiring focus that left little room for dwelling on the past. His apartment stayed neat and organized. He cooked actual meals instead of eating takeout. He started running in the mornings, watching the sun rise over the lake while his feet pounded the pavement in steady rhythm. He was building a new life, piece by piece, and finding that he actually enjoyed his own company. Then, on a Tuesday evening in mid-August, Lydia showed up at his apartment. John heard the knock around 7 p.m. He wasn't expecting anyone. Opened the door cautiously and found his wife, his ex-wife, he reminded himself, standing in the hallway. She looked terrible. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. No makeup, dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. She'd lost weight, her clothes hanging loose on a frame that had once been carefully maintained. "Lydia." John's voice was flat. "What are you doing here? I need to talk to you." Her voice cracked slightly. "Please." Every instinct told him to close the door. This woman had betrayed him, stolen from him, shown him exactly how little he'd meant to her. But curiosity won out, morbid perhaps, but real. "You have 5 minutes." She stepped inside quickly, as if afraid he'd change his mind. Looked around the sparse apartment. Furniture that wasn't his, walls that weren't decorated, the transient space of someone still in transition. "You really left," she said softly. "Did you think I wouldn't?" Lydia turned to face him, and he saw tears building in her eyes. Real ones, not the manipulative kind she'd used in past arguments. These were the tears of someone genuinely breaking down. "I ruined everything," she said. "My job, my friends, my life. Everything." John crossed his arms. "You made choices. These are the consequences." "I know. God, I know." She wrapped her arms around herself, a defensive gesture. "Darren left. Did you know that? Just vanished. Blocked my number, wouldn't answer my calls. Like none of it mattered. Did you expect something different? I thought he loved me." The tears spilled over now, tracking down her cheeks. "He said all these things, made all these promises. And the second things got hard, he just left." John felt nothing. No satisfaction, no sympathy, nothing. Just a hollow acknowledgement of reality playing out exactly as he'd known it would. "I've been applying for jobs," Lydia continued when he didn't respond. "Everywhere. Nobody will hire me. They Google my name and see everything. The affair, the firing, all of it. That's what happens when you make your personal life very public through very poor decisions. I'm living in a shithole apartment with people screaming at each other through the walls. I can barely afford food. My sister won't talk to me. My friends." She choked on a sob. "I have nobody. Lydia, I know I don't deserve your sympathy. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I'm drowning here, John. I'm actually drowning." She moved toward him, and John stepped back instinctively, maintained the distance between them like a barrier. "Please," Lydia whispered. "I need help. I need something. Anything. What exactly are you asking for?" "I don't know. Money. A place to stay. A reference for jobs." She was crying harder now, the words coming out broken and desperate. "I'll do anything. I'll sign whatever you want. I'll admit fault, give up claims to assets, anything. Just please help me." John watched her fall apart in his living room and felt absolutely nothing. No urge to comfort, no desire to fix, no impulse toward reconciliation. Whatever connection they'd once had was so thoroughly severed that watching her cry felt like observing a stranger's breakdown. "No," he said quietly. Lydia's head snapped up. "What? No, I'm not helping you. I'm not giving you money or housing or references or anything else you think you need. But I'm begging you. I'm literally begging. I know." And my answer is still no. She stared at him, shock and disbelief warring on her face. "How can you be so cruel?" "Cruel." John's voice stayed calm, but something sharp entered it. "You fucked another man for 8 months. You tried to steal my retirement money. You planned to ambush me with divorce papers while your affair partner stood behind you like some kind of prize. and I'm cruel for not bailing you out of the consequences. That's different. It's not different. You chose this, Lydia. Every step of the way. You chose Darren over our marriage. You chose lies over honesty. You chose drama and attention over respect and loyalty. These aren't things that happened to you. These are things you made happen. Lydia sank onto the edge of his couch, burying her face in her hands. Her whole body shook with sobs that sounded like they were being torn from somewhere deep inside her. I'm sorry, she managed between gasps. I'm so sorry. I know it doesn't mean anything, but I am. I destroyed everything good in my life for a fantasy that turned out to be nothing. John walked to his door, opened it. I think you should leave now. John, please. Your 5 minutes are up. She looked at him with red, swollen eyes. Looked at the open door. Back at him. Some part of her seemed to understand that this was truly the end, that no amount of tears or apologies would change his mind. Lydia stood up slowly, walking toward the door on unsteady legs. She paused in the threshold, turning back one last time. I loved you, she said. I know you don't believe me, but I did. Once. If that's true, John replied, then you have a very strange way of showing love. She flinched like he'd struck her, then walked out into the hallway. John watched her make it to the stairs before he closed and locked the door. The silence in his apartment felt thick and complete. He stood there for several minutes, processing what had just happened. Lydia had come to him broken and desperate, and he turned her away without hesitation. A year ago, hell, even 3 months ago, that would have been impossible. He would have helped, would have tried to fix things, would have sacrificed his own peace for the hope of salvaging something. But that version of John was gone. The man who remained had learned that some things, once broken, couldn't be repaired, shouldn't be repaired. He made dinner, watched the news, went to bed at a reasonable hour, slept deeply and dreamlessly. The final divorce decree was issued in September. John and Lydia were officially no longer married. Asset division went heavily in John's favor, given the documented affair and attempted financial fraud. Lydia received minimal spousal support for a limited time, just enough to technically meet Missouri's standards for equitable distribution, but not enough to rebuild the life she destroyed. Patricia called with the news. It's done. You're officially divorced. Thank you for everything. My pleasure. Well, not pleasure exactly, but you know what I mean. She paused. You did remarkably well through all this, John. Stayed focused, stayed rational. That's rarer than you might think. I had good help. You had good instincts. I just provided the legal framework. After hanging up, John sat in his apartment. His permanent apartment now. A 2-bedroom place near the lake that he'd purchased outright with a share of the house sale, and felt something settle deep in his bones. Relief. Finality. Freedom. He'd gone through hell and come out the other side. Not unscathed, nobody emerged from a divorce completely unharmed, but intact, strong, certain of his own worth in a way he'd never been before. Lydia tried to contact him one more time in October. A text message from a number he didn't recognize, clearly her using someone else's phone to get around the block. I know you hate me. I know I deserve it, but I need you to know I'm getting help. Therapy. Working on myself. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I'm trying to be better. John read the message 3 times. Considered responding. Considered ignoring it. Finally settled on a single reply. I'm glad you're getting help, but my life doesn't include you anymore. Please respect that and don't contact me again. He blocked the new number, then sat and thought about whether he'd been too harsh. Decided he hadn't. Boundaries weren't cruelty, they were self-preservation. 2 days later, he blocked her on every remaining platform where they'd been connected. Social media, email, filters, everything. Created a clean separation between his past and his future. November brought the first real cold of the season. John started waking up earlier, watching the sun rise over the lake while drinking coffee on his small balcony. The water reflected the changing sky, pink, orange, gold, blue, and he found himself appreciating small moments in ways he never had before. He'd been so focused on maintaining his marriage that he'd forgotten what it felt like to simply exist without constant tension. To come home and not wonder what mood Lydia would be in. to make plans without checking whether they conflicted with her schedule or desires, to sleep deeply without worry. This was peace. Not happiness, exactly, not yet, but peace. The kind of hard-won tranquility that came from surviving something terrible and choosing to build something better from the wreckage. John started dating in December. Nothing serious, just coffee meetings and dinner conversations with women he met through the company's softball league and a triathlon training group he joined. He wasn't ready for anything substantial, and he was honest about that. Most women appreciated the clarity. One of them, a financial analyst named Michelle, who was recovering from her own messy divorce, summed it up perfectly over drinks one evening. "We're all just walking wounded, trying to figure out how to trust again," she said, swirling her wine glass. "At least you're honest about where you are. Half the guys I meet pretend they're totally fine when they're clearly still devastated." "Are you fine?" John asked. "Getting there. Same as you, probably." They'd gone out 3 times since then. Nothing romantic, just companionship from someone who understood the specific pain of betrayal. It was enough for now. Christmas approached, and John's parents invited him to spend the holidays with them in Kansas City. He accepted, grateful for the distraction. His mother hugged him tight when he arrived, the kind of hug that said, "I'm sorry for everything you went through," without using words. "You look good," his father said that evening, the two of them sitting in the garage workshop while Dad pretended to organize tools. "Better than I expected. I feel better than I expected. Your mother was worried you'd be bitter, angry at the world." John considered this. "I was angry. For a while. But anger takes too much energy to maintain. I'd rather use that energy building something new." His father nodded slowly. "Your sister says you're doing well at the new job." "I am. It's challenging. Keeps me focused." "Good. That's good." Dad set down the socket wrench he'd been holding. "I'm proud of you, son. What your wife did, what she put you through, most men would have fallen apart. You didn't. I came close. But you didn't. That's what matters." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the space heater humming, the smell of old motor oil and sawdust familiar and grounding. John returned to his apartment after New Year's. Started 2026 with a clarity of purpose he'd been lacking for years. His job was stable, his finances were recovering, his mental health was improving day by day. He heard through the grapevine Emily Parker's husband mentioning it casually at a gas station, that Lydia had finally found work. Some administrative position in Springfield, almost an hour commute from her apartment. It paid less than half what she'd made before, but it was employment. A start. John felt nothing at this news, except a vague hope that she'd find some kind of stability. Not for her sake particularly, but because her continued suffering didn't actually bring him any peace. He'd gotten what he needed from their divorce: freedom, justice, closure. Her ongoing struggles were just sad. He stopped following news about her after that. Stopped asking questions when people brought her up. Let her fade into the background of his life like a bad dream that had finally released its grip. In late January, almost exactly a year after discovering Lydia's affair, John sat on his balcony watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of fire. A cold wind blew off the water, sharp enough to sting, but he didn't go inside. He thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the anger, the systematic dismantling of both his marriage and his wife's carefully constructed fantasy. The letters he'd sent, the evidence he'd gathered, the ruthless efficiency with which he'd protected himself while watching Lydia's world implode. Some people would call what he'd done vindictive, cruel, disproportionate to the crime. John didn't agree. He'd simply responded to being attacked. Lydia had tried to destroy him financially and emotionally. Darren had participated gleefully in that destruction. They'd planned, executed, and celebrated their betrayal without considering the consequences. So John had shown them consequences. Real ones. Permanent ones. He wasn't sorry. Wouldn't apologize. Would do it all again if faced with the same circumstances. Because respect mattered. Loyalty mattered. Truth mattered. And when someone violated all of those things, when they took advantage of trust and devotion and love, they didn't deserve mercy or second chances or gentle handling. They deserved exactly what they'd earned through their choices. John went inside as full darkness fell. the lake disappearing into shadow behind him. Made dinner, poured a glass of wine, put on music. Live his life in the quiet, peaceful space he'd fought so hard to create. Lydia had chosen drama over loyalty, attention over respect, a reckless fantasy over a steady reality. John had chosen peace, peace with teeth, peace that came from standing firm in his own worth and refusing to be diminished by someone else's choices. And in choosing that peace, in fighting for it, defending it, building it from the wreckage of his marriage, he discovered something he'd lost somewhere along the way. Himself. Strong, clear, uncompromising. A man who knew his value and wouldn't settle for less than he deserved. The divorce hadn't broken him. It had refined him, burned away everything weak and uncertain, leaving only what was solid and real. He raised his wine glass in a silent toast to that truth, then drank deeply and turned his attention to the future. Behind him, the past finally finished dying. Ahead, something new was being born.